I turned 30, standing alone in the dim glow of my tiny Portland apartment, a half-melted store-bought cake on the counter, and 3 candles flickering like they were trying their best to pretend this was a celebration. My phone lay face up beside it, screen black, except for my own reflections staring back. No missed calls, no texts, not even one accidental happy birthday from the wrong relative. Outside, the rain tapped against the window like a reminder. Another year, another birthday. No one in my family bothered to remember. I lit the candles anyway because someone had to witness me turning 30, even if it was just me. Right as I was about to blow them out, my phone buzzed. My heart leapt for a second, stupidly hopeful, until I saw who it was, a number I didn't recognize. "Congratulations, Harper," the message read. "Your Skyline Garden Penthouse feature goes live tomorrow. You're our cover story." I laughed, quiet, almost bitter. My family forgot I existed today, but tomorrow an entire city would see my name on the front of a real estate magazine. I slid the phone across the counter and pressed the heel of my hand against my chest, willing the ache to settle. Rain streaked the window like silver threads. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I should have gotten used to this feeling after 3 decades of being the background character in my own home, but it still stung in the exact same places it always had. I picked up my sketchbook, the same one I'd carried since college, and let it fall open to an old drawing, a small sunlit studio with tall windows and a garden on the roof. The dream had started long before Harpervale Development ever existed, long before anyone in Portland knew my name. It came from the lonely corners of a childhood where I had to build the homes I didn't have. I traced the lines of the roof garden with my thumb as memories drifted in like fog. Hillsford had been a charming little town to everyone, except the child ignored inside that blue-shuttered house on Willow Road. Being the third of 4 children meant I was always somewhere between not the first and not the last. My older brother Aaron was the Golden Boy captain of the basketball team since middle school, walking trophy magnet. My older sister Lily was the academic darling straight, as debate champion student body vice president, and the youngest Noah was the fragile one, born sickly, in and out of hospitals, the center of every whispered worry. And me, I was the quiet one who built cardboard houses in the backyard, the one always told, "Not now, Harper, we're busy." I closed the sketchbook before the ache grew too sharp. The cake on the counter looked embarrassingly hopeful, like I'd expected someone to cut it with me. I didn't cry, it wasn't that kind of sadness. It was the kind you carry like a familiar weight. A stone you learn to balance so well, people assume you're fine. Still, I found myself whispering into the empty room. It would have been nice if one of them remembered. My voice sounded younger, almost 12 again. Images flickered across my mind, Mom promising she'd come to my middle school art showcase, but texting last minute that Lily had a practice round for academic decathlon. Dad insisting he couldn't miss Aaron's away game, even though I had a regional design competition that same weekend. And my 16th birthday, when I spent the evening alone at the kitchen table, the decorations drooping, the ice cream cake half melted by the time the family walked in at midnight and realized what day it was. I shook the thoughts away and took a slow breath. I'd spent years believing if I worked hard enough, shined bright enough, they would finally see me. But the truth was simple and sharp. They only looked up when the light benefited them. Another buzz. A new notification flashed across the screen, an email from the Pacific Urban Renewal Awards. My project had been nominated for their Innovative Adaptive Reuse category. I stared at the subject line, letting it sink in. No matter how the night felt, life was still moving. My work was still blooming. My name was still rising. I walked to the window, the city stretching out below, lights shimmering through the drizzle. Portland had been good to me. It was the first place that didn't ask who I was related to, but asked instead, "What can you build?" I pressed my palm against the glass, imagining the skyline I had helped shape. I wasn't the invisible girl from Hillsford anymore. I'd spent years learning fighting, climbing piece by piece, brick by reclaimed brick, and now everything I'd built was finally standing tall. My laptop chimed on the table behind me. I flipped it open and found an email from Real Estate Northwest. Attached was the mock-up of the magazine cover, my name in bold letters above a photo of the penthouse I had designed from foundation to finish. A vision in the Sky Harper Vale and the future of adaptive reuse. My breath caught. I traced the letters as if they belonged to someone else. The penthouse, my penthouse, glowed under perfect lighting, its glass roof reflecting the fading Portland sunset. Every detail in that picture carried a piece of my soul, the reclaimed beams, the spiral staircase I'd fought contractors for, the garden, filled with native plants that I'd hand-picked at dawn. I knew the city would talk about it. I knew developers would study it. But the thought that my family might finally stumble across this, that was a twist I wasn't ready for. I shut the laptop gently. They didn't remember my birthday, I murmured. But they're about to remember my name. The truth wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was a shift, a quiet reclaiming of all the years they'd dismissed me. My success wasn't built to spite them, but it certainly didn't hurt that the world saw what they never cared to. A crack of thunder rolled over the city, low and distant. I rubbed my arms against the chill and blew out the candles on my cake. The little flame died with a soft whisper, the smoke curling upward like a secret promise. I wrapped the leftover cake, sliding it into my tiny fridge, and tried to pretend it didn't symbolize something. As I washed my hands, another notification pinged on my phone. A calendar reminder I'd set months ago. Follow up with Hillsford Women's Alumni Day. I snorted softly. I'd been invited as a guest of honor this year. My hometown finally had a reason to brag about me. I'd ignored the message at the time. Suddenly, it didn't feel as irrelevant as it once had. I sank into my small dining chair and pulled my knees up, staring at the glow of the city through rain-blurred glass. All the echoes of my childhood, the forgotten birthdays, the empty audience seats, the polite half-smiles quieted under the hum of Portland's night. My life was here now. My work, my future. Still, a thought tugged at me, stubborn and intrusive. If they ever saw this penthouse, what would they say? I pressed my forehead against the edge of the table and laughed softly, tiredly. Maybe I didn't need them to say anything, but I also knew something else, something undeniable. The moment they saw that magazine cover, everything would change. I didn't know if it would be for better or worse. I only knew the storm hadn't even begun. And when it hit, I would be ready. I woke up the next morning with the faint smell of extinguished candles still clinging to the air, the kind of scent that reminds you a celebration happened even when no one showed up for it. The cake was still sitting in the fridge, wrapped neatly like a wound I didn't want to open again. I stretched, blinked hard against the early light, and reached for my phone, not out of hope, just habit. No missed calls. No texts from family belatedly remembering the daughter they forgot. The only notifications were work-related contractor updates, supplier emails, a reminder about a site visit. It was strangely comforting. Work always remembered me. I pulled on a sweater and made myself a cup of coffee before my body had fully caught up with the day. Rain hammered lightly on the window, Portland's version of a good morning. I watched the drops race each other down the glass while I sipped, slowly grounding myself. I had a full day. I had a business to run. Life didn't pause just because my family never bothered to press play. As I tied my boots and grabbed my bag, my eyes landed on the old shoebox under the entryway table. It was filled with things I didn't want to carry anymore, memories of Hillsford and a childhood held together with tape. I nudged it open with my foot, the cardboard groaning softly. The first thing on top was a photo I always wished someone else had taken. I was 10, standing next to a model house I'd built from cereal boxes, my hair a little too messy, my smile a little too eager. I remembered waiting an hour for my family to come outside to see it, but only my youngest brother Noah eventually wandered out. He clapped, told me it looked cool, and tugged me back inside so I wouldn't wait any longer. I shut the box before my throat tightened and headed out. Driving through the wet morning streets, I let the city wrap around me like a second skin, something chosen, not inherited. In Hillsford, everything had been predetermined: who was impressive, who was important, who was visible. In Portland, no one cared where I came from. They cared what I could do. And that difference alone had saved me more times than I could count. Still, as I made my way to the construction site for a smaller project, a craftsman bungalow remodel, I felt the tug of yesterday. 30. I had turned 30 alone. I'd promised myself it wouldn't matter, but the truth was quieter and sharper. It still hurt. The bungalow sat on a corner lot, tucked under towering fir trees, a sweet little structure with peeling paint and windows that sagged slightly at the edges. I loved it. There was something of myself in homes like this, overlooked, underestimated, holding more potential than anyone bothered to notice. Morning boss Samuel called as I stepped out of my car. He was in his 60s, with hands big enough to hold whole stories inside them. Ever since the brownstone project years ago, he'd treated me with a respect I still wasn't used to. "Morning," I said, tucking my hair behind my ear, as I joined him by the porch. "How's the foundation check going?" "Better than expected," he grunted. "She's a stubborn old lady. Holds herself together." I smiled faintly. "I can relate." He gave me a knowing look, the kind only someone who has lived decades longer can give. "You okay today? You look tired." I considered giving the safe answer, "Just busy," but something in his steady gaze chipped away at my guard. "Yesterday was my birthday," I admitted. His brows lifted. "No kidding. And you were here working." "It's fine," I said, shrugging. "My family forgot." Samuel let out a soft whistle, shaking his head. "People forget birthdays. Families shouldn't." I shrugged again, but my voice carried a little crack I didn't intend. "It's not the first time." He didn't pry. That's why I let him in. Instead, he gestured toward the house. "Come on, work helps." He was right. Work always helped. We walked the property, inspecting beams, taking notes on water damage, adjusting the plan for the renovation. My mind eased into the rhythm I knew best, assessing, calculating, envisioning. It was like entering a world where everything broken could be rebuilt with enough patience and skill. A world where I had control. Around noon, as I leaned against the porch railing reviewing measurements, my phone buzzed. I nearly ignored it, assuming another contractor update, but the preview message caught my eye. Hillsford Women's Alumni Day final reminder. I exhaled sharply. I had forgotten the email blast was scheduled for this week. When I first received the invitation, I deleted it immediately. Why would I go back to a place where I was a ghost, where my sisters were stars, and I was the filler space between? But now, after the magazine cover announcement, part of me wondered what would happen if I walked into that auditorium. Not for them, for me. "You should eat something," Samuel said behind me, startling me slightly. "You're zoning out." "Yeah." I closed the email, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Long night. As the afternoon sun fought through clouds, we wrapped up the inspection and I packed my tools. Samuel clapped my shoulder. "Don't let them get to you. Whoever they are." I gave him a half smile, trying not to. As I drove back across the bridges stretching over the Willamette River, the city sparkled beneath the lifting clouds. Even on gray days, Portland had a way of feeling alive, like it was rooting for me in ways my hometown never did. I rolled down the window, letting cold air rush in, clearing the fog of old memories. When I got home, I kicked off my boots, dropped my bag, and settled at my tiny dining table. The shoebox was still on the floor where I'd left it, like it had been waiting for me. I pulled it closer, let my fingers brush the lid, then slowly opened it again. If I was going to face the past, whether at Alumni Day or in the silence of my own apartment, I needed to stop being afraid of the pieces. A birthday card from when I was 13 sat near the top. The envelope was addressed to Harper, but the inside read, "Happy Birthday, Hannah." I remembered how Mom said, "Oh, it's just a mix-up, honey, you know I'm juggling too much." I had pretended not to care. I'd eaten cake with my siblings afterward, laughing too loudly to hide the hurt. I tucked the card away and found a brochure from a school art festival. My name was printed in the bottom corner of the page, though I had placed first in the design category. Lily's awards had filled the central section. Layout space is limited, Mom had told me. You understand, right? I had understood. I always understood. My phone vibrated again. For a split second, I thought ridiculously that maybe someone had remembered my birthday after all. But when I picked it up, it was an email from a developer in the Pearl District asking about my consulting availability. Another job opportunity. Another door opening. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling. My life was moving forward, even if my family never had. I closed the shoebox gently and slid it back under the table. The memories inside weren't going anywhere, but neither was I. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift, a tiny but steady resolve rising in my chest. Maybe I couldn't change the past. Maybe I couldn't make my family see me. But I could choose how I carried all of it. I stood and walked to the window, watching the last traces of rain disappear across the skyline. My birthday had come and gone without a whisper from home, yet somehow the silence felt less like abandonment and more like an ending. Or maybe a beginning. Tomorrow the magazine cover would drop. Tomorrow my name would be printed across the city. Tomorrow, whether anyone from Hillsford remembered me or not, the world would see exactly who I had become. And soon, very soon, so would they. I still remember the day I left Hillsford, like a bruise under the skin, faded, but easy to press and reopen. It was early, the kind of morning where the whole town still smelled like wet pavement and drifting pine. My acceptance letter to Portland State sat folded 3 times in the pocket of my jacket. I kept touching it like it might disappear if I didn't hold on. No one else in my house was awake. Or maybe they were and simply didn't care to come downstairs. Either way, the result was the same. I dragged my single suitcase across the front porch alone. The quiet was thicker than fog. I waited a whole minute staring at the door, hoping ridiculously that it would open, and someone would say, "Wait, Harper, let us drive you." But the knob never turned. The porch light flickered once as if waving me off, and that was it. I exhaled, slowly picked up my suitcase, and walked to the bus stop at the end of the block. The bus hissed as it pulled up, brakes whining, and an elderly woman stepped off. She gave me a curious look as I hauled my suitcase up the steps. "College?" she asked, her voice warm. I nodded. "Starting today?" Alone, I paused, then told the truth. "Yeah." She smiled sadly. "The ones who leave alone grow the strongest." Her words stuck with me longer than any encouragement I'd ever gotten at home. During the ride, Hillsford shrank into the distance. Its little shops, its blue-shuttered houses, its tidy lawns, all blurring into one long ribbon of you, weren't meant to shine here. I rested my forehead on the window and watched as the trees swallowed the last glimpse of the only town I'd ever known. My stomach twisted, not regret, but something like release. I didn't know then how much I would need that feeling, years later. Portland greeted me like a different planet, louder, messier, bigger. The air smelled like coffee and rain, the sidewalks buzzed with strangers who didn't look twice at me, and somehow that was comforting. I dragged my suitcase into my dorm room, sat on the bare mattress, and exhaled for the first time in 18 years. The next morning began the routine that would define the next 4 years' work-class work-study work again. I took the 5 a.m. shift at the campus coffee shop, learning to pull espresso shots before my brain even fully woke up. After class, I grabbed a sandwich and sprinted to my job at a vintage furniture store off Burnside, where the owner, a man named Clyde, called me kiddo and taught me the differences between oak and chestnut by running my fingers along the grain. At night, I tutored freshmen in business fundamentals, using whiteboards covered in equations I'd memorized out of necessity, not passion. My passion lived somewhere else, between the lines of my sketchbooks, in the angles of old buildings, in the way certain streets made light fall just right. When other girls pinned concert tickets to their dorm walls, I taped up sketches of buildings. I admired the steel-framed warehouses, the stone arches of Union Station, the narrow century-old apartments with crooked fire escapes, trailing down their backs. During my second semester, I met Professor Margot Lane. She was the first adult who ever looked at me like I wasn't accidentally in the room. "You understand structures intuitively," she said one afternoon, watching me adjust a 3D model of a community center design. "Where did you learn this?" "At home," I answered. "I built a lot of things." She tilted her head. "And did anyone notice?" I hesitated. "Not really." Professor Lane nodded like she already knew. She invited me to assist her research on urban revitalization, just small tasks, at first cataloging case studies, organizing design files. But even that felt monumental compared to the invisibility I'd grown used to. I learned more from her in a year than I had in all of high school combined. But even as Portland became home, Hillsford kept its claws. I learned that the hard way when I visited during winter break my freshman year. The drive back felt like time rewinding, the same cracked sidewalks, the same houses I used to count on my walk home from school, the same heavy quiet inside my parents' living room. I'd brought my portfolio with me, my best sketches, my models, the concept designs Professor Lane said were graduate-level thinking. I placed the folder neatly on the arm of the couch waiting, but my family was busy. Dad fussed over Aaron's new varsity schedule. Mom baked cookies for Lily's academic team. Noah tried to sit with me, but he got dragged to the kitchen for medicine. By evening, someone had tossed a coat over my portfolio, not even opened it. I stared at the folder for 10 whole minutes, my throat tightening with each second. Later that night, as the whole house slept, I took the portfolio and carried it back upstairs quietly, like it was something to be ashamed of. My heart hurt in a slow, familiar way. Not sharp, just heavy. A weight I knew too well. The next morning, before anyone woke up, I packed my bag and left a note on the kitchen counter, heading back to campus early. "See you later." No one called. No one noticed I'd left. Back in Portland, everything felt brighter, louder, alive. My tiny dorm room felt like freedom, not loneliness. I poured myself into work, into learning every inch of city, planning, into reading blueprints until the lines blurred. I spent weekends wandering downtown, taking pictures of old brick facades, rusted fire escapes, and forgotten buildings begging to be reborn. One night during my second year, while sitting in the library at midnight, surrounded by coffee cups and draft sketches, a group of architecture seniors peeked at my screen. "Whoa," one of them murmured. "You designed that?" I nodded, embarrassed. "You should enter this in the regional competition," another said. "Seriously, this is incredible." Their praise hit me with startling force. I hadn't expected to be seen at all. When they walked away, I stared at my drawings, suddenly aware that maybe for once I wasn't the invisible one in the room. That night I made myself a promise. Not the childish dream of making them proud, not anymore. Something sharper. Something rooted in survival. I will become someone impossible to overlook. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was a vow to the girl who stood alone on that porch step in Hillsford, suitcase in hand, hoping someone would call her back. By junior year, I was chosen as a teaching assistant, a role almost never given to non-seniors. Professor Lane handed me the key to the studio lab with a quiet smile. "You earned this, Harper." I held the key in my palm long after she walked away, staring at it like a symbol. I wasn't the child waiting for a chance anymore. I was creating my own. A month later, my life shifted again. Professor Lane gave me a worn book about adaptive reuse, its edges, frayed pages marked with notes from decades earlier. A small bookmark stuck out near the end. She tapped it with her finger. "Study this project," she said. "The Havenwood District. It failed 30 years ago. But with the right vision, someone strong enough could revive it." I slipped the book into my bag that day, without knowing that bookmark would lead me directly to the building that would change everything. Sometimes the universe leaves clues long before you understand them. And sometimes the first step toward a future you don't yet see is simply walking away from the past that never saw you. I first saw it on a rainy Saturday in early spring, the sky a flat sheet of gray pressing low over the city. I had been running errands for Evelyn. Her grocery list was always precise, meticulous, and somehow still charming, and took a wrong turn off Hawthorne. The street I ended up on was quiet, in a way Portland rarely is. No cars, no dogs, no cyclists weaving by. Just the whisper of rain and the sagging silhouette of something forgotten. The house sat at the end of the block like it had been waiting for someone to notice it. A Victorian with faded paint the color of wilted lavender, a sagging porch, and windows sealed shut with plywood. The roof dipped dangerously on one side, and the ornamental cornices looked like they were holding on by stubbornness alone. It wasn't beautiful, not in the way people meant. It was tired, abandoned, and almost embarrassed to still be standing. But I felt something pull in my chest the moment I saw it. I parked the car without thinking. The rain tapped harder as I approached, soaking the cuffs of my jeans. The overgrown yard brushed against my legs. Up close, the details came alive. The delicate trim carved around the windows, the faint outline of what had once been stained glass, the intricate railing that someone had painstakingly fashioned a century ago. A house like this had a soul. It was impossible not to feel it. I walked around the perimeter slowly, as if I were intruding on someone's memory. The backyard was clogged with fallen branches and an old metal bench half swallowed by ivy. The chimney leaned slightly, bricks shifting like loose teeth. Still, the bones were good, strong. And I knew good bones when I saw them. A gust of wind rattled a loose shutter, making me jump. It clapped against the siding twice, then settled. The sound snapped me back to reality. I was standing in the rain, examining a house I had no reason to be near, and no money to even think about. But the thought wouldn't go away. This could be something. I drove straight home, groceries still in the back seat. I dropped everything on the counter and grabbed my laptop, fingers shaking with adrenaline. I typed the address into the county records, breath-catching when the listing appeared: bank-owned. Vacant for 3 years. Assessed value far below what it should have been. The tax history was a mess: delinquent, deferred, penalized, accumulating dust in someone's ignored file. It was perfect. That night I didn't sleep. I printed zoning maps, renovation, cost estimates, material lists, structural diagrams. I examined old blueprints from the historical archives and sketched possible layouts until my pencil dulled to a nub. I built a cost model that made my stomach twist: $3,246.12, and my savings could barely cover the roof repair alone. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. By morning, I had an entire binder full of plans. I walked across the hall to show Evelyn. She opened the door, already smelling faintly of lavender and Earl Grey. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Not a ghost," I replied breathlessly. "A house." She raised her eyebrows. "Well, come inside before you let all the heat out." We sat at her round kitchen table, the one always covered with a lace cloth she refused to replace, even though it had a burn mark from 1990-something. I showed her the photos, the sketches, the numbers. She listened without interrupting, tapping one long finger against her teacup every time I grew too excited. When I finally finished, breathless and hopeful, she leaned back. "You remind me of Joseph," she said softly, "her late husband. The man who built half of old Portland before developers with deeper pockets arrived. He saw potential where others saw problems," she continued. "He believed buildings deserved a second life." "I do too," I whispered. "I know," she answered. For a moment neither of us spoke. Rain pattered against her window the same way it had against the Victorians. Evelyn reached for her purse with a slow, decisive movement. My stomach flipped. "Whitney, no Harper," she corrected herself gently. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to listen carefully." I straightened. "I've been watching you since you moved in. How you work, how you think, how you help others with no expectation in return. You see buildings like Joseph did. You see the story inside them. She took a deep breath. I want to invest. I blinked. What not give, she clarified. Invest. A proper agreement. A partnership. $150,000. The room tilted. My lungs forgot how to work. I can't, Evelyn, that's hush, she interrupted. Let me finish. I've had that money sitting in a fund that's done nothing but grow cobwebs of boredom. I want it to matter, and I want you to use it to make that house matter. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Evelyn slid a stack of papers toward me, clean, crisp, prepared. She had been thinking about this longer than I realized. Joseph always told me, she said, eyes softening. If you want to understand someone's character, give them an opportunity. See what they do with it. I swallowed hard. Why me? Her smile was small but certain. Because you're the only one who walks up 4 flights of steps every time the elevator breaks without a single complaint. Because you carry more grit than people twice your age. Because you didn't just see a falling apart house yesterday, you saw its future. My throat tightened. I pressed my fingers against my forehead, overwhelmed. I'll pay you back, I said finally. With interest. I know you will. 2 days later, after signing the partnership documents with trembling hands, I walked into the bank with Evelyn at my side. The Victorian was mine. Not because of luck, not because someone handed me anything freely, but because someone finally believed in me the way I'd believed in buildings for years. When I pushed open the creaking front door of that house for the first time, dust floated up like ancient breath. The air smelled of old wood and cold earth, the kind of scent that settles in the bones. Sunlight snuck through cracks in the boards, striping the floors with pale gold. I whispered, I'm going to take care of you. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, something whispered back, not in words, but in the soft settling of old timbers, the faint hum of possibility, the quiet gratitude of a place finally seen. The house greeted me each morning with the same smell of sawdust, cold air, and old secrets. I spent the first week walking its hallways with a notebook in hand, tracing every beam and every crack, learning its language. The floors groaned under my feet like they were waking up after a long sleep. The wallpaper peeled in curling ribbons, revealing faded plaster beneath. The staircase sagged so heavily on the left side that Samuel shook his head the first time he saw it. You sure this place wants to be saved? He asked, leaning on the banister with skeptical affection. I'm sure I said, though my voice trembled with responsibility. He studied me for a long moment before nodding once. Then let's save her. The next months became a blur of early mornings and late nights. I woke before sunrise, packed a thermos of coffee, and drove across town to unlock the front door of the Victorian before the crew arrived. The lock always stuck on the first turn, and I learned to jiggle it twice, then lift the handle just slightly as the metal clicked open. Every detail mattered in a house this old. We started with demolition, pulling down the rotting walls piece by stubborn piece. I wore gloves so thick I could barely grip the tools, and still the splinters found me. Dust clung to my skin, my hair, my clothes. At night I would shower and watch the water run gray at my feet. But I loved it. Even the aches felt like proof I was building something real. One evening, as I knelt under a window scraping away layers of paint, Samuel cleared his throat beside me. You ever done this before? He asked, though he already knew the answer. No, I admitted. Not like this, he chuckled. I figured. Your enthusiasm is too unbroken. I prefer that over jaded, he smirked. Give it time. But after a few weeks something shifted. The house began giving back. Beneath grime and decay, we uncovered original hardwood floors with grain patterns that curled like fingerprints. In a closet, I found an old stained glass window wrapped in 3 layers of newspaper from the 1930s. When sunlight hit it, the colors burst across the room like a secret message from the past. I cleaned it gently and hung it temporarily in the kitchen window. Every morning afterward, I stood in its glow while drinking my coffee. One Saturday, I found myself alone at the house after the crew left early. The winter light was fading, turning everything a soft blue. My hands ached, my shoulders were tight, and I wanted deeply to call someone and tell them about the progress. To say, "Look what I did today," and hear pride in return. But I had no one to call, at least no one who would understand. I took a deep breath and kept working. The real test started when the contractors hit the foundation issues. The front left corner had sunk almost 2 inches over the decades. Fixing it required lifting the entire house with hydraulic jacks. It was terrifying watching something so fragile rise and crackle like an old ship being pushed against the tide. The day we lifted it, Samuel stood right beside me. "If anything creaks too loud," he muttered, "run." It was a joke, mostly. When the jack turned and the frame groaned long, low trembling, I felt my heart drop. But the house held. Somehow, impossibly, it held. Afterward, I sank onto the steps outside shaking. Samuel lowered himself next to me with a grunt. "You did good today." "We did good," I corrected. He nudged my shoulder. "You're starting to think like a builder." I smiled despite the exhaustion. "Maybe I always was." He nodded slowly. "Maybe no one bothered to notice." That line hit harder than I wanted it to. In the evenings when everyone else left, I stayed to learn the delicate work because I couldn't afford specialists, and because Samuel insisted knowing the craft mattered if I wanted to lead. Under the yellow glow of a single work lamp, I practiced restoring the banister, sanding in long, even strokes, until the wood revealed warm tones beneath the old varnish. "You have passion," Samuel said one night, watching me struggle with a chisel. "Terrible technique, but passion. That counts." His laughter filled the empty house, and for a moment I felt something like belonging. Word spread in the local trades community that a young developer was trying to save a doomed Victorian. Old craftsmen who usually kept to themselves began stopping by. An elderly electrician named Hector showed me how to update the wiring without destroying the original fixtures. A plasterer with hands like sculpted stone taught me the rhythm of repairing ceiling medallions, soft pressure kid like breathing. It was the first time in my life experts treated me like someone worth teaching. A few months in the house finally reached the transformation stage: walls, repaired floors, leveled wiring, safe plumbing functional. I spent nights obsessing over every design choice. The kitchen became a balance between vintage charm and modern simplicity. The primary bedroom received restored trim and a new bay window seat. The attic, once full of dust and raccoon footprints, turned into a tiny art studio flooded with natural light. Every decision was guided by one question: what would this house have wanted to be if it hadn't been forgotten? Then came the doubt. One afternoon, while reviewing invoices, I realized our budget had nearly evaporated. I had underestimated costs in 5 different categories, and even with Evelyn's investment, we were dangerously close to shortfall. Fear punched me in the stomach. I called Evelyn, hands shaking. "We're running low." Her voice remained calm. "Is the project still worth finishing?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "Absolutely." "Then finish it," she replied. "And next time you'll budget better." Her confidence steadied me more than I expected. The final weeks felt like a sprint on unsteady ground. I patched walls myself, installed fixtures, stained cabinets, learned to tile backsplashes through video tutorials at midnight. My hands were blistered, my back ached, my lungs tasted like sawdust. But the house blossomed under the effort. And then, as if the universe decided I'd earned a break, everything aligned. An office of small law partners touring properties stumbled onto our listing. They walked through the Victorian in silent awe, their suits crisp against the warm, restored wood. This one of them said, "Has soul." 3 weeks later, they made an offer with a 40% return on Evelyn's investment. When the papers were finalized, I sat in my car, gripping the check, my breath unsteady. Tears slipped down before I could stop them, not because of the money, but because of everything it represented. Recognition, validation, a future. I went straight to my job at Blake & Associates and handed in my resignation. Gary blinked at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're doing what now?" he scoffed. "Starting your own firm with one project." "It's a start," I told him. "It's reckless," he replied. But he wasn't worth another second of my time. I walked out and didn't look back. Harper Vale Development was born the next morning on the floor of my tiny apartment with nothing but my laptop, a business license, and the smell of freshly printed contracts. The Victorian had been my first real home. Not because I lived in it, but because it taught me who I could become. The email came in at 6:42 in the morning, right as I was pouring coffee into the only mug in my apartment that didn't have a paint stain on it. Offer accepted, the subject line read. The law partners had signed. The Victorian was officially sold. For a moment, I just stood there, coffee steaming against my palm, letting the truth settle into my bones. I'd done it. My first project. My first real sale. My first step into the world I had dreamed of since I was old enough to draw windows on cardboard. Then the realization followed. With the sale finalized, there was no turning back. I set the mug down and braced my hands on the counter, breathing deeply. Relief washed through me, warm and bright. But there was fear underneath it, too, fear of what came next. Fear of whether I was ready. And behind all of it, like a shadow from an old life, the thought drifted in. Should I tell my family I didn't? I knew what would happen. They'd say, "Good job," with distracted voices, then pivot back to Aaron's athletics or Lily's new promotion. I didn't need that kind of half-attention anymore. Instead, I called Evelyn. "They accepted," I said the moment she answered. I knew they would. I could hear her smile through the phone. "So what's next, Harper?" For the first time in my life, the answer was entirely mine to decide. I spent the morning building a digital portfolio, organizing before and after photos, process, shots, structural notes, and a short write-up about the philosophy behind the restoration, honoring what buildings once were while giving them new life. When I clicked upload on my website, the screen glowed with my own name at the top, Harper Vale Development. It looked surreal. It looked tiny. It looked like a beginning. Around noon, I drove across town to the small industrial loft I sometimes used as a workspace. I spread every document I owned across a long table, blueprints, invoices, concept sketches, the business plan I had been shaping for months. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It had to be. I had barely gotten through my first round of project applications when my phone buzzed. "Is this Miss Vale?" a clipped voice asked. "Yes, this is Rowan from Portland Heritage Magazine. We saw your brownstone project circulating online. Would you be open to an interview?" I blinked at the wall. "You want to interview me?" "Yes. Your approach to adaptive reuse is uncommon for developers your age." My heart thudded. I said yes before fear could stop me. An hour later, she was in my workspace, camera in hand, taking pictures of my sketches while asking me what drew me to historical properties. "They deserve a chance," I said simply. "Someone built them with care. I'm just helping them breathe again." When she left, I sat on the floor among my drawings, stunned. It was the first time anyone outside of my circle had cared about my ideas, and the recognition stung in the same place where my family's silence lived. By late afternoon, I forced myself back into work mode. If Harper Vale Development was going to survive, I needed clients. I needed projects. I needed something, anything, to prove the Victorian hadn't been a fluke. That something came in the form of a creaky craftsman bungalow in the Mount Tabor district. The owners were reluctant but curious, unsure if they wanted to renovate or sell. "You seem young," the wife said when we met. "How many houses have you done?" I said honestly. "But I can show you what I did with it." I opened my laptop and showed her the portfolio. She scrolled in silence until she reached the living room. Transformation, sunlight pouring through newly restored windows, hardwood floors shining like honey. Her expression softened. "You saved it." "Yes," I said quietly. "I did. They hired me on the spot." Over the next few weeks, the bungalow consumed me the same way the Victorian had. I crawled under decks, sketched new layouts, until my wrist cramped, negotiated with contractors, argued with zoning inspectors, and learned more about water damage than I ever cared to know. I made mistakes, costly ones. One contractor overpromised and underdelivered, leaving a portion of the roof exposed during a rainstorm that set the project back 2 weeks and cost me thousands I didn't have. The night I found the ruined insulation, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel until my vision blurred. I considered calling home just to hear a familiar voice. But I knew exactly what I'd hear. That's what happens when you take on too much. Why don't you get a stable job? So instead, I called Samuel. You awake? I asked. Just barely, he said. What's wrong? When I told him, he sighed and said, I'll be there at 7. Bring coffee. We'll fix it. We did. We always did. By the time the bungalow was complete, the owners hugged me with tears in their eyes. You brought it back to life, the husband whispered. Hearing those words felt deeper than pride. It felt like healing. With 2 successful projects under my belt, inquiries started to trickle in. A gallery owner wanted help converting an old laundry facility. A retired couple asked me to evaluate their duplex. A photographer wanted a studio with character and history. It was all small scale, but it was steady. My portfolio grew. My confidence grew with it. But my bank account didn't. I was treading water barely. Invoices came late. Suppliers demanded deposits I couldn't always provide. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life by quitting Blake and Associates. Then one afternoon, while packing up tools at a job site, a man approached me, sharp suit, sharp eyes, hands tucked into his pockets, like he had a skyscraper hidden somewhere. Your veil? He asked. Yes. I'm Tom Reyes, commercial broker. I nodded cautiously. How can I help you? I've seen your work. People in the trades talk. He tilted his head. They say you have a way of making old buildings listen to you. I laughed nervously. I don't know about that. I do, he said, and I think I have something you'd want to see. He handed me a card, white, understated, expensive. The address printed on the back made my jaw tighten. It wasn't a house, wasn't a cottage, wasn't a duplex. It was a building. A 6-story, long-forgotten commercial structure in the industrial district. Why me? I asked quietly. Because no one else would touch it, he said. And I have a feeling you're the kind of person who sees possibility where others see liability. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I stared at the address long after he walked away. The Victorian had changed my life. The bungalow had built my reputation. But whatever stood at that address, that could change everything. The first time I stood in front of the Havenwood factory, the air tasted like metal and rain. 6 stories of forgotten brick loomed over me, its windows boarded up like blindfolded eyes, its rusted water tower jutting from the roof like a broken crown. The neighborhood was quiet in that heavy, expectant way. Abandoned warehouses, empty parking lots, the distant hum of traffic echoing off walls that hadn't felt purpose in years. This is it, Tom Reyes, said, his hands in his coat pockets as he watched my face closely. Ugly, isn't it? No, I whispered. It's asleep, he snorted. That's a kind way to put it. We walked toward the steel door at the side of the building, the one hanging crooked on its hinges. Tom shoved it open with his shoulder, and it screeched like something waking up after too long. Inside, the air was colder. Quiet except for the soft drip of water from somewhere deep in the building. The floor was scattered with broken tiles, curled papers, and shards of glass. My boots crunched with every step. Tom's flashlight cut through the darkness. You're one of the only people I've met who didn't bolt when they saw the exterior. Makes me think you might actually understand this place. I didn't answer. I was too busy listening to the building, its groans, its whispers, the faint echo of a life it used to have. It wasn't pretty, but it was extraordinary. We climbed the old stairwell carefully, every step shaking under our weight. At the landing, the light hit walls marked with graffiti and decades of grime. A peeling sign read Heavenwood Manufacturing, built in 1926. At the third floor, a draft hit us cold sharp. One board covering a window had come loose, letting a thin blade of daylight stream inside. Dust swirled in it like floating gold. "Structural reports?" I asked softly. "Bad," Tom replied. "Worse than bad. Asbestos. Lead paint. Electrical needs to be gutted. 3 support columns compromised." He paused. "Colonial Development looked at it last year. They ran screaming." I stepped toward the beam of light. "Because Colonial builds identical glass condos. They wouldn't know what to do with history if someone explained it slowly." I felt him watching me, reassessing. On the 6th floor, we reached the space that would eventually change my life. The vast open room stretched in all directions, the windows tall, industrial, stunning, even under layers of grime wrapped around the entire perimeter. Though most were boarded up, some cracks let slivers of white daylight leak through, illuminating floating dust in ethereal patterns. And the view, oh the view! Even in decay, with half the skyline obscured, it was breathtaking. Mountains, water, city, sky. "This is where most people turn around," Tom said. I walked farther toward the center. A sudden crack under my foot made my heart jump. The floor dipped sharply. Before I could react, Tom grabbed the back of my jacket and yanked me backward as a rotted board snapped in half, dropping into the dark void below. My pulse hammered. "That," he said, "breathless would have been a hell of a way to die." But my eyes stayed locked on the space. "Someone built this with pride," I murmured. "Someone cared." Tom gave a low whistle. "Most people see a death trap. You see a love letter." "It's both," I admitted. He studied me for a long moment. "You're serious. Dead serious. Then you're crazier than the rumors said." "Rumors?" he shrugged. "People talk. The Victorian. The bungalow. They say you bring buildings back from the dead." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We spent another hour walking the echoing corridors. Every room told a story: cracked window frames, tiles hand-placed nearly a century ago, graffiti from teenagers who had snuck inside, ceiling beams that creaked like warnings. When we finally stepped back outside, I felt the cold wind hit my face like a slap. "Well," Tom asked, stuffing his hands into his pockets again. I stared at the red brick, the boarded windows, the slanted water tower silhouetted against the gray sky. "I want it," I said. "You're out of your mind. Probably. You'll go bankrupt. Maybe. Then why do it?" I took a slow breath. "Because it could be something no one has ever seen before. Because it deserves to be more than what it became. Because I know how to make it breathe again." For a long moment, Tom said nothing. Then he exhaled, resigned and amazed. "You're really going to try?" "I'm not going to try," I said. "I'm going to do it." He looked down at the ground, then up at the building, then back to me. "Well, if you're going to risk everything you own, your money, your company, your sanity, you might as well see what you're up against." He opened his briefcase and handed me a thick folder. Inspection reports, environmental tests, historical records. "Make sure you actually read this before you sign your future away." I took it, feeling the weight of possibility in my hands. That night I didn't sleep. My apartment floor was covered in documents, blueprints, hazard assessments, cost projections. I ran numbers until my eyes blurred. The mortgage alone would eat every cent I had. The remediation would take months. The structural fixes, if even possible, would cost more than any project I'd ever touched. Every reasonable part of me said no. But the part of me that had once stood alone on a porch at 18, clutching an acceptance letter no one cared about, that part said yes. In the morning, I made a list of banks. I started calling. Every one of them said no. Too risky, too large scale, too inexperienced, too unstable. I hung up after each call with a knot in my stomach. I could hear my father's voice in the back of my mind, dismissive as ever. "That's what you get for chasing pipe dreams, Harper." But I would not be that girl anymore. I took a break only when my phone buzzed with a short message from Margot Hurd. A rumor you found something interesting. Come by the studio. I drove across town in silence. When I entered the old studio, she was standing at the drafting table, glasses perched on her nose. You look like someone who's wrestling a dragon, she said. It feels bigger than a dragon. She nodded toward the folder. Show me. I spread out the documents, my hands trembling just slightly. As she read through them, her expression shifted: concern, curiosity, astonishment. Then she looked at me. You want to take this on? Yes. It will nearly kill you. I know. It will cost more than you have. I know. It will be the defining project of your life. I swallowed. I know. Margot breathed out slowly. Then I'll introduce you to two people. Investors. Small scale. Smart. They believe in sustainability, and they believe in underdogs. Her voice softened. They remind me of you. My eyes burned unexpectedly. I won't let you down, I whispered. She shook her head gently. No, Harper. You won't let yourself down. That night, after meeting the investors and answering the toughest questions I'd ever faced, I walked out into the cold air, with a promise: conditional funding, limited but real. Enough to consider making an offer. Enough to make the impossible feel possible. 3 days later, I stood before the Havenwood factory again. The sky was brighter this time. The bricks looked less tired. Or maybe I did. I took the purchase agreement from my folder, my hands steady, my breath, long and low, and I signed my name. As the pen left the paper, a rush of terror and exhilaration shot through me. I had done it. I had just bought a 6-story beast no one else wanted. But I knew what no one else did. If I could bring Havenwood back to life, I wouldn't just build a landmark. I would build the kind of future my family never believed I could have. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't scare me. It fueled me. The warning came on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun was cutting a thin line of gold across the concrete floor. I was reviewing the overnight remediation report when the site engineer, Marcus, jogged across the 6th-floor landing, his hard hat crooked and his face pale. Harper, he said, breathless, you need to come downstairs. Now. My stomach tightened. He didn't sound worried, he sounded afraid. We took the stairs down to the 3rd floor, where half the crew stood gathered around a column wrapped in temporary supports. The air felt different here, thicker, heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. Marcus pointed at the steel gauge clipped to the concrete. It shifted again. 1.2 inches since last night. My heart dropped. 1 inch was dangerous. 1.2 was catastrophic. What's the risk, I asked, though I already knew. If this column fails, he said quietly, it could take out the entire east side. Floors 3 through 5 might go with it. A cold wave rolled through me. Havenwood wasn't just a project. It was everything. My savings, my future, my company, my reputation, my sanity. Everything I had clawed together since the day I stepped off that bus at 18. I pressed a hand against the column. It vibrated faintly like a pulse out of rhythm. Okay, I whispered. What are our options? Marcus exchanged a look with the crew lead. Emergency shoring steel supports. $60,000. Minimum. $60,000. Money I didn't have. Money that didn't exist in my contingency budget. I swallowed hard. We'll figure it out. So, we proceed, he asked. We proceed, I said, forcing the words out before fear could swallow them. But the house of cards I had built around Havenwood was already trembling. By noon, the situation had escalated. A city inspector, word travels fast, when buildings threatened to collapse, showed up unannounced. He was tall, sharp-eyed, clipboard in hand, wearing the expression of someone preparing to shut a site down. You're the developer? He asked, looking me up and down as though trying to reconcile my age with the scale of the disaster. Yes, I answered. He gestured toward the structural reports. This building is unsafe. Honestly, I'm considering issuing a temporary halt. The room spun. A stop work order could kill everything. Investors would run. Loans would vanish. Contractors would walk. Havenwood would rot into memory. I forced myself to breathe. Give me 3 days, I said. Let me produce a full correction plan. Engineering, funding timelines, everything. 3 days, his eyebrows shot up. You realize how far gone this place is? Yes, I said. But I also know what it can become. Something flickered in his eyes, doubt, maybe curiosity. After a long pause, he exhaled. You have 72 hours. The moment he left, my knees nearly buckled with relief. 72 hours. 72 hours to save the biggest project of my life. The next 3 days blurred into one long stretch of panic coffee, cold air, and the metallic taste of fear. I slept on site, curled on a cot inside what would eventually become the building's mechanical room. I reviewed every blueprint, every load diagram, every structural study from 1926 onward. Marcus and I huddled over sketches at 2 a.m, tracing reinforcement plans with shaking hands. This might work, he mumbled. It has to, I whispered. But at the 48-hour mark, another wave of bad news hit. The roof. The entire west section was rotting faster than the initial assessment showed. If Portland's forecasted storm hit before we could brace it, water could seep through all 6 floors. The wood trusses were soft, the steel corroded, and the insulation practically melting. Marcus pulled me aside. We don't have enough crew to shore the column and patch the roof. What are you saying? We need a miracle? For a moment I thought I might actually cry. But the tears stayed lodged behind the stubborn part of my chest where desperation lived. I'll pull a second crew, I said. With what money, I'll find it. He looked at me with something like pity. You're going to break yourself. I don't break, I said. I build. But inside something cracked. That evening, while the sky darkened and the wind picked up, I stood on the scaffolding along the 6th floor exterior, watching the clouds swallow the sun. My muscles throbbed, my head pounded. I'd had 2 hours of sleep in the last 48. You should sit, Samuel called from below. He had driven across town after hearing the situation from a former colleague. His face was etched with worry. I'm fine, I called back. You're shaking, he said. I looked down at my hands. He was right. But Havenwood was shaking too, literally and figuratively. And I couldn't afford to stop. At midnight, the storm arrived. Rain pounded the construction tarps, rattling the rigging, sending cold water down the back of my jacket. The crew scrambled to secure the beams, shouting over the wind. A loose tarp snapped violently, nearly pulling a worker off balance. Harper Marcus shouted, "Get inside," but I stayed where I was until the last beam was stabilized. By dawn, I had a fever brewing behind my eyes. By noon, I had a full plan, drafted reinforcement cost, breakdowns, timelines, environmental assurances, and a structural innovation. Most developers would never think to attempt exposing the compromised columns instead of hiding them, turning the weakest part of the building into a defining visual feature. It's bold, Marcus said, and risky, but it honors the building, I said. He gave a slow nod. You're something else, Harper. When the inspector returned on the 3rd day, my hands trembled as I passed him the folder. He read in silence while I stood perfectly still, heart pounding. He looked at the structural sketches first, then the load calculations, then the timeline, then the photos of emergency roof bracing done in the pitch-black storm. Finally, he closed the folder. This, he said slowly, is ambitious. I held my breath. And it might actually work. My knees went weak with relief. You'll get your continuation permit, he said, signing the document, but I want weekly reports. Directly from you. Absolutely, I breathed. He paused before leaving. Most people would have walked away. Smart people, even. Maybe I'm not smart, I said, exhausted. He shook his head. No. You're just the kind of stubborn that saves buildings. When he left, I leaned against the wall, feeling Havenwood's heartbeat steady just slightly beneath my palm. Later that evening, as the sun set in a smear of orange over the river, I stood on the 6th floor landing and let my head fall back. The worst wasn't over, but the building wasn't doomed, not yet. As I headed down the stairs, my phone buzzed. I expected a contractor update. Instead, it was my mother. A single message. "Are you coming home this summer? Your sister needs help with something." Of course she did. No mention of Havenwood. No question about whether I was alive or well. No acknowledgement of the storm I'd just survived. Just another request. I stared at the message as the metal railing cooled my hand. For the first time in my life, my heart didn't sink. I felt nothing. I slipped my phone into my pocket, walked back into the echoing dark of the building, and whispered to Havenwood. "We're not done. Not even close." I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I woke up sitting upright at my drafting table, cheek pressed against a stack of blueprints. My neck ached, my back throbbed, and my laptop battery had died sometime during the night. Outside the studio window, the first light of morning washed the sky in a soft gray, the kind that meant the city was still waking up. I rubbed my eyes and forced myself to stand. There was no time to dwell on how I felt. The next phase of Havenwood depended on tight coordination between contractors, engineers, and artisans. Every hour mattered. Every mistake would cost money I didn't have. When I arrived at the site, the crew was already hard at work, the clang of metal echoing through the empty floors. Scaffolding lined the east wall now, and temporary steel bracing had transformed the interior into a maze of beams and supports. It looked less like a building and more like the skeleton of some massive creature being held together by willpower alone. "Morning, Boss," Marcus called from across the landing. "Morning," I said, my voice hoarse. "We've stabilized the worst 2 columns. The third one still concerns me, but we'll reinforce it today." "Good. What about the roofing materials delivered?" He pointed to a stack of sealed bundles. "Weatherproofing starts this afternoon." The air outside the windows was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from the hills beyond the river. The view alone was worth every hour of lost sleep. That view would eventually become the crown jewel of the penthouse. We walked floor to floor, reviewing progress. In the third-floor corridor, the electrician Hector waved me over. "Your antique fixtures are going to be a nightmare," he said, stroking his graying beard. "But a beautiful nightmare. Can they be salvaged, most of them? A few are too far gone. But those big industrial sconces, they'll shine again." His grin warmed something inside me. Craftsmen didn't smile easily. Not genuinely. By noon, the building felt alive. Not fully awake, just stirring. Every hammer, strike, every drill, every conversation added something back into its bones. The dust in the air caught light in a way that made the space look like it was remembering how to breathe. When I stepped onto the roof, a gust of wind whipped my hair back. The sky stretched wide, mountain peaks cutting the horizon. I walked to the southeast corner, the spot I had quietly designated as the heart of the future penthouse garden. This roof could become a sanctuary. I could see it clearly, native plants lining the edges, a reclaimed wood walkway, a water reclamation feature that would take Portland's constant rain and turn it into something giving instead of destructive. "Planning your garden already?" a voice called from behind me. I turned to find Tom Reyes leaning against a rusted air duct, his coat pulled tight around him. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Checking in," he said. "Word gets around. Heard about the near shutdown." I sighed. "We're fine now." "No," he said quietly. "You're holding this place together with grit and half your sanity." I didn't argue. He walked to the railing beside me, looking out over the river. "It's a hell of a view." "It's going to be better when the glass roof is installed," I said. "Light everywhere. A vertical oasis." He glanced at me. "You really believe you can pull this off?" "I don't believe," I said. "I know." He considered that. "Investors don't always understand vision." He paused. "But I do." I wasn't sure what he meant, and before I could ask, he nodded and headed back down the stairs. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. Meetings with the engineering team, calls with suppliers, 3 arguments about shipment delays, and one terrifying moment where the freight elevator stalled mid-floor with 2 workers inside. We pried the doors open and pulled them out safely, but the malfunction cost us another $8,000 in repairs. $8,000 I didn't have. Don't panic, Lisa, my financial consultant said during our evening call. You're still ahead of schedule. That doesn't help me pay for repairs, I know. But your valuation is rising. Havenwood is becoming talk. I sat on the floor of my office back against the wall. Talk doesn't pay contractors. No, she said softly, but it attracts buyers. My heart skipped. Buyers, I repeated. Developers. Firms. Investors. People who want a piece of whatever you're building. I didn't know what to do with that. For years, no one wanted a piece of anything I created. I couldn't picture it yet, not without flinching. After the call, I stayed on the 6th floor long after the crew left. The wind whistled through the cracked window frames. In the fading light, the space felt almost sacred. I imagined the future open-concept living space with polished concrete floors, custom stairwells spiraling to the roof, glass panels arching overhead like a transparent spine, warm wood tones mixed with exposed steel beams, soft lighting bouncing off green leaves of rooftop plants, a home that breathed with the city, a home unlike anything in Portland. I didn't hear the visitor until he was nearly beside me. You're here late, Samuel said, arms crossed against the cold. Couldn't sleep, I replied. Or wouldn't I have to laugh? Both. He looked around, his expression softening. It's already different. You've changed it. I hope it's enough, I murmured. It will be. He paused. You know I've worked on old buildings my whole life. They only wake up for people who listen. I blinked at him. I listen. That's why this one's waking up. His voice cracked a little with pride. I didn't have words. We spent the next hour discussing the next phase, the lower floor lofts. Each unit needed its own identity, industrial charm, preserved history, modern livability. I mapped out ideas on my tablet, sketching rough layouts. Just as we wrapped up, my phone buzzed. I expected another contractor update. Instead, it was a message from a journalist. Saw early photos of Havenwood. Could we feature you in our Women Shaping Urban Future series? I read it twice, then a third time. Me, featured. I sent back one word, yes. On the long drive home, the streetlights blurred past the car windows. The city felt different, closer somehow, like it was beginning to notice me back. When I finally reached my apartment, I walked straight to the bathroom mirror. I looked tired, hollow-eyed, hair tangled. But beneath that, I saw someone I didn't recognize from a few years ago. Someone unignorable. Someone who didn't need a family's approval to exist. Someone building something bigger than herself. Before bed, I checked my phone again. A new notification blinked at the top. It was a message from my mother. Call me. It's important. If she was saying it was important, it meant one thing. It wasn't about me. I turned off the phone without replying. Tomorrow, I had a building to save. The call came just as I was signing off on the final steel order for the penthouse staircase. My phone buzzed with my mother's name lighting up the screen, with an insistence I recognized too well. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out. But some habits take longer to kill than others. I answered with a clipped hi. Harper, her voice rushed and anxious, breathless. Finally. I've been trying to reach you. You texted me last night, I said. At 11. Well, yes, but this is urgent. Those words didn't mean emergencies in my family. They meant I was needed for something no one else wanted to deal with. What's going on? I asked. Silence. Then a nervous inhale. It's your father, she said. You should come home tonight. My jaw tightened. Is he hurt? No. Nothing like that. Well, another hesitation. Just come for dinner, all right? Everyone will be here. We need to talk. There it was. The phrase that dragged me back to childhood, the summons disguised as invitation. I exhaled slowly. I'm busy. Oh, Harper. Her voice softened in a way it never had for my dreams or my work. Please, a lifetime of being overlooked should have hardened me enough to say no. But I wasn't hard. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't cold. I was tired. And tired people sometimes give in just to guarantee an end to the tugging. Fine, I said. I'll come. She exhaled, like she'd won something. After I hung up, I stood in the skeleton of the future penthouse fingers, resting on the cold steel rail. The city stretched below me in every direction, alive, vibrant, growing. A world I'd built myself into, one late night, one blueprint, one risk at a time. And yet my family could still pull me back with nothing more than a vague, "We need to talk." I shook off the bitterness and headed downstairs. There was still work to do. By afternoon, the site was buzzing. Welders sparked bright arcs of light along the staircase structure. The carpentry crew installed framing for the top-floor lofts. A ventilation specialist cursed loudly at the ancient ductwork, which hissed like it resented being disturbed. "You leaving early today?" Marcus asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "I have family dinner," I said, the words tasting unfamiliar. He raised an eyebrow, voluntarily. "Not exactly." "Well," he said with a half-smile, "good luck. Personally, I'd rather crawl into a sewage tunnel." Honestly, same. But I still left early. Driving back to Hillsford felt like sliding down a path I'd already climbed once. The same narrow road, the same sagging mailboxes, the same house-white trim brick walkway porch light flickering like it always had. I parked behind my brother's shiny SUV, which still had its dealership sticker on the window. A sign of new debt, not new success. The front door opened before I could knock. Harper, Mom cried, pulling me into a hug that felt too warm, too sudden. Her perfume hit me first, something floral and nostalgic that made my chest tighten. "You look so grown," she said, touching my sleeve as if trying to place me. "I'm 30, I reminded her gently. "Well, yes," she said, forcing a smile. "Come in, honey." Inside, the dining room table was set with the good plates, the ones reserved for holidays or when someone important visited. Except tonight wasn't about a celebration. The air felt thick, tense. My father sat at the head of the table, hands folded over a stack of manila envelopes. When he looked up at me, something flickered behind his eyes, not pride, not affection. Something closer to calculation. "There she is," he said, "our star builder." I almost laughed. He'd never called me anything close to that before. My siblings Lily and Aaron stood awkwardly near the kitchen doorway. "Hey, Harp," Aaron said, offering a lopsided grin. "Saw your building online. Fancy stuff." "You saw Havenwood?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Yeah, well, kinda. My friend sent a link." He shrugged. "People talk about it," Lily chimed in. "It's been all over the local real estate blogs. And one of my coworkers said the penthouse is like 3-point-something million. I blinked. 3.4. Their eyes widened. My stomach twisted. This was why I'd been summoned. We sat down. The meal was elaborate. Roast chicken, garlic, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. Mom kept fussing, filling glasses, smoothing napkins, adjusting candles. Everyone avoided looking at the stack of envelopes in front of my father. When he finally cleared his throat, the room sank into silence. "Well," he began, "we're glad you're here. We haven't had a proper family dinner in a long time. Not for lack of opportunity, I thought." He folded his hands again, leaning forward. "Your mother and I wanted to talk about an opportunity. Something good. Something that could benefit all of us." "Here it comes, we've been thinking," he continued. "With your success in development, and my experience in contracting, and your siblings' skills." "What skills?" Lily muttered. "We could build something together. A family enterprise. A true legacy." I stared at him. "Dad," he slid one of the envelopes toward me. "This is a proposal. A partnership contract. You'd join our company, or rather, we'd merge our strengths. Combine resources. Expand. Expand. Meaning use my thriving business to rescue their struggling one." Mom placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Honey, we just want what's best for the family." I leaned back, heart pounding. "And what is it you need from me?" They exchanged glances. A wordless agreement. "We need capital," Dad said. "And credibility. And with your name attached?" "My name," I repeated, tasting the bitterness. He pushed the contract closer. you'd be a minority shareholder. Your expertise would guide projects, but leadership would stay with you, I finished. And Aaron and Lily, chocolate chip lies coated with family unity. I opened the contract. The terms were astonishing, my assets lumped into a shared pool, full control ceded to my father, and my role reduced to design consultant. Not developer, not partner, consultant. My pulse roared in my ears. This is insulting, I said quietly. My mother gasped. Harper, did you think I wouldn't read it? I asked, looking at each of them. Did you think I'd be so desperate for your approval? I'd sign anything you put in front of me. My father's face reddened. Watch your tone. No, I said firmly, you watch yours. You ignored my birthday. You ignored every milestone. You ignored my life. But now that my work is worth millions, now that the Penthouse is on magazine covers, you remember I exist. Silence. Heavy, sharp, ugly. Aaron swallowed. Harper, it's not like that. Then what is it like? My father slammed his palm on the table. It's called family responsibility. You owe us. I stood so quickly my chair scraped the floor. I owe you nothing. The room froze. For the first time in my life I saw it clearly, their need, their fear, their expectation that I would fold the way I always had. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I gathered the contract, folded it once, and set it on the table. I'm not merging my company, I said. I'm not bailing out yours. And I'm not shrinking myself to make you comfortable. Their faces twisted, hurt, anger, disbelief, but I didn't soften. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. What's that? Lily asked. My counter-proposal. Dad snorted. What, you're going to hire us? No, I said calmly. I'm offering consulting support, temporary, conditional, professional, nothing more. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. I turned to leave. Harper, Mom called, voice cracking. Where are you going? Home, I said. To the life I built, not the one you ignored. I stepped through the doorway without letting myself look back. As I reached my car, the night air felt sharp and clean, chilling my lungs with every breath. I rested my hands on the steering wheel, letting the adrenaline settle. For 18 years I had swallowed my voice. Tonight I used it, and the woman who walked away from that house wasn't someone they could silence again. I drove straight back to Havenwood after leaving my parents' house, the road blurring through the windshield as if the universe wanted to erase the memory behind me. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear. From release. Years of swallowed words had finally torn free, and my whole body felt both lighter and dangerously unmoored. When I reached the site, the building loomed against the night sky, its dark silhouette sharp and familiar. Havenwood had become a second home, no, a first home, the only place that had ever let me take up space without questioning why. I unlocked the side door and stepped inside, greeted by the cool scent of old brick and lingering dust. The silence wrapped around me like a balm. Here, no one demanded anything from me. Here, no one pretended to love me, only when it served them. I climbed the stairs, slowly running my hand along the rough concrete wall. On the 6th floor, the moonlight spilled through gaps in the boarded windows, striping the open space in silver. I stood in the center of the future penthouse, letting the silence steady my breath. This is mine, I thought. All of it. Every beam, every risk, every sleepless night. Mine. The next morning I woke early, still wearing the same clothes, my head resting on a rolled-up jacket. My phone buzzed with messages, 8 from my mother, 4 from Lily, 1 from Aaron, all variations of, "Please reconsider. We didn't mean it like that. And don't throw away your family." Not one message asked if I was okay. Not one message apologized. I turned off my phone. Work was waiting. By mid-morning, the crew assembled to review the next phase, opening up the 5th floor to create the double-height living area for the penthouse. The energy on site felt different, charged, hungry, full of momentum. The building was ready. "All right," I said, sweeping the room with my eyes. "Let's walk through it." We reviewed the structural plan, the new beams, the cut lines, the timeline. When I finished, Marcus gave me a look. "You seem sharper today," he said. "I made some decisions last night. Good ones." "Yes," I said. "The right ones." He nodded like he understood more than I said aloud. Then we began the real work. The demolition on the 5th floor was grueling, loud, teeth-rattling, messy. Plaster crumbled in thick clouds and broken wood scattered across the concrete. But beneath the ruin, beauty slowly emerged, century-old beams still strong enough to carry new dreams. By noon, the sunlight streamed through the skeletal frame of what would soon be the penthouse atrium. I stood beneath it, breath caught, imagining the finished space glass, stretching the full height of 2 floors, greenery spilling from wall planters, warm wood softening the industrial steel, light, air, space, possibility. Suddenly, I felt someone approach behind me. "I knew you'd make it look like this," Samuel said quietly. I smiled. "Like what?" "Like hope." The word lodged in my throat. We stopped only when the crew clocked out, leaving the building in an echoing hush. I stayed behind to complete a final review of the day's progress. Around 8 p.m., I heard footsteps echoing in the stairwell. "Harper," a voice called. I turned and froze. It was Tom Reyes. He stepped inside, brushing dust off his jacket. "Figured I'd find you here." "What's going on?" I asked, wary. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the center of the room, studying the open frame, the exposed beams, the rising shape of the future. "You know," he said, "I've represented properties all over this city. Old mills, forgotten warehouses, historic banks. But I've never seen anyone transform a building the way you're transforming this." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. "I'm just trying to do it justice," I said softly. He looked at me. Really looked. "You're doing more than that. You're rewriting its destiny." My throat tightened. "Why are you here, Tom?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I got a call today from a major corporate client. They want to move into this district. They want a flagship presence. And they want to meet the developer behind Havenwood." My breath caught. "Why, because people are talking about you, Harper, not the building. You, your vision, your approach. Your stubborn refusal to abandon a structure everyone else gave up on." He stepped closer. "And because they think you're the future of Portland." A lump formed in my throat, something between disbelief and fragile hope. He held out a business card with a handwritten name on the back. "Here's the executive's contact. Meet them tomorrow. They're interested in the retail spaces and 2 of the lofts." I stared at the card. This could change everything. "Yes," he said. "Which is why I'm telling you before your family tries to twist this into something they deserve credit for." I froze, heart clenching. "They contacted you." He hesitated, then nodded. "Your father reached out last week. Told me the Vale family was behind this development. Made it sound like you were part of a larger team." The room seemed to tilt. "He tried to claim it," I whispered. "This. All of this." "He tried," Tom corrected gently. "But I knew better." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." He reached for the frame of the open window, gazing at the city lights. "You don't owe anyone your success, Harper, not even the people who raised you, sometimes especially not them." His voice carried a weight I didn't ask about, but somehow understood. Before he left, he said, "Make sure the story people hear is yours, not theirs." When the building grew quiet again, I sat on the edge of the future staircase, the cold steel grounding me. My family's voices replayed in my mind, need, expectation, guilt. Old chains, but then I saw Havenwood, tall, strong, rising, not because someone handed me anything, but because I built it. The next morning, I wore my best blazer, not expensive, but sharp, professional, mine. I walked into the cafe where the corporate rep wanted to meet. A woman in a tailored charcoal suit stood when she saw me. "Miss Vale," she said, extending her hand with genuine interest. "I've heard remarkable things about you." "Thank you," I replied, shaking her hand. "I hope I can live up to them." She smiled. Oh, I have no doubt. By the time the meeting ended, we had discussed a long-term lease potential design collaboration and a partnership that would secure Havenwood's commercial future. A future created entirely by my work, my risks, my vision. When I stepped outside, the winter sun caught the tops of the buildings, turning the skyline gold. My phone buzzed. A new message from my mother. Dinner again Friday. Everyone wants you there. Please don't be late this time. I stared at the words, then slipped my phone back into my pocket. I wasn't the one who was late. They were. Years late. And soon they were finally going to understand exactly who I had become. The night of the second family dinner arrived with the same heavy sky that had followed me my whole childhood, low-gray, expectant. If the first dinner had been a summons, this one felt like an ambush masquerading as reconciliation. Still, I went. Not because they asked, and not because I hoped anything would be different, but because I had something to say and something to set straight. I parked on the street instead of the driveway this time. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the porch light flickering the way it always had, casting uneasy shadows across the yard. I stood there for a moment, breathing in cold air, grounding myself in the knowledge that I was not walking into this as the girl they used to overlook. I was walking in as the woman who built Havenwood. When I knocked, the door opened instantly. Harper Mom beamed, pulling me into a hug that lasted too long and felt too rehearsed. Inside, the table was set again with the good china. The candles were lit. My siblings sat straight-backed like students waiting for the principal. My father stood at the head of the table, his posture, stiff jaw clenched in what he must have believed looked like authority. But he wasn't the authority in the room, not anymore. I walked in, set my bag down calmly, and took my seat without waiting to be directed. "Well, Dad," said, clearing his throat. "We appreciate you coming back. After the misunderstanding last time." "Misunderstanding," I repeated softly, tasting the word like something bitter. Mom rushed to fill the silence. "We just want tonight to be better. As a family." I folded my hands on the table. "Then, let's talk honestly." They weren't prepared for that. I could tell. Dinner began with small talk, Lily's classes, Aaron's job search, Mom's volunteer work. It all floated around me like background noise. I nodded politely, waited, watched. Then, halfway through the meal, Dad finally exhaled and reached under the table for a folder. A new folder. My pulse remained steady. "Before anything," he said, "I want to apologize if you felt pressured." "We simply thought—" "No," I interrupted quietly. "You don't get to reframe what happened." He stilled. "You didn't pressure me," I continued. "You planned to use the success I built to rescue the business you ran into the ground. You wanted control without contribution. And you expected me to say yes because I always have." The room went silent. Even the candles seemed to flicker uneasily. Dad swallowed. "We didn't mean you meant exactly what you wrote in that contract. But that doesn't matter anymore." I reached into my bag, pulled out my own folder, and placed it gently on the table. "This," I said, tapping it, "is the updated consulting proposal." Their eyes widened. Dad frowned. "We don't want handouts." "This isn't a handout," I replied evenly. "It's a roadmap, a chance to rebuild with integrity. But it only works if you're willing to operate honestly, transparently, and without dragging my name into things I didn't agree to." They exchanged nervous looks. Lily chewed her lip. Aaron stared at his plate. Dad bristled. "You're talking like we're children." "No," I said. "I'm talking like a businesswoman discussing terms. If you want my help, these are the conditions." I outlined them clearly. No merging, no shared assets, no using my name to secure contracts, no suggesting I co-own anything I don't, strict professional boundaries, monthly accountability, and respect, genuine respect for my work, my time, and my choices. "And if we don't agree?" Dad asked. I looked him in the eye. "Then Daniel's construction closes. And that will be your legacy, not mine." He stared at me for a long time, anger warred with pride, pride lost. Finally, he lowered his gaze. Let's review the terms. It wasn't victory. It wasn't defeat. It was something in between, an acknowledgement of reality. While they read, Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes shimmered. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For all the years we didn't see you. For making you feel small. You didn't deserve that. And I'm proud of you, Harper. Truly." Her voice cracked. I didn't cry, but something inside me loosened. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But space for it. After an hour of tense negotiation, real negotiation, the kind where everyone actually listened, we reached an agreement. Not perfect, not magical, but functional, a start. When we finished, Dad leaned back and rubbed his forehead. "You've changed," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I've grown. There's a difference." He nodded once, a gesture halfway between acceptance and surrender. By the time dessert came out, the room felt lighter. Not healed, but no longer wounded. I didn't stay long after. I hugged my mother, nodded at my siblings, shook my father's hand. A handshake, not a hug. A handshake said things clearly: respect, distance, intention. On the drive back to Portland, the city skyline rose like a promise I had made to myself long before Havenwood existed. The lights glittered across the water, alive and vibrant. I drove straight to the site. The penthouse was nearly complete now. Glass-installed garden frames built the spiral staircase, shining under the temporary bulbs. The air smelled like fresh timber and new beginnings. I walked to the center of the room, the heart of everything I'd built, and let myself finally breathe. My phone buzzed. A notification from Portland Heritage Magazine. "Your feature goes live tomorrow." Cover story confirmed: the woman who rewrote a city. I closed my eyes as the truth settled in. They would see me. All of them. Not because I begged. Not because I folded. But because I rose. I stood at the window and watched the city glow beneath me, the reflection of the new glass roof shimmering above like a sky I had built with my own hands. I whispered to the empty space. "You did it. Not for them. Not for forgiveness. For me. For the girl who left home alone at 18. For the woman who built everything she was never given. For the future that didn't wait for permission. And if you've made it all the way to the end of this story, tell me something. Have you ever had to rise on your own? Have you ever built a life no one believed you could? I'd love to hear your journey. If this story moved you, don't forget to leave a comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories of grit, transformation, and the power of choosing yourself. Your voice matters here. Stay a while. Let's grow together.